Welcome to the Parenting with Impact podcast with your hosts Elaine Taylor-Klaus and Diane Dempster, co-creators of ImpactParents.com, an online community, award-winning blog, and service organization helping parents all over the world to raise complex kids become capable, independent adults.
Hi everyone, Elaine and Diane here, and we know that you want your complex kids to grow up to be happy and independent, and yet you're not always sure how or when to help with that.
In this podcast, we'll encourage you to collaborate with all kinds of complex kids and support them in navigating life and learning.
And we'll interview leading experts from around the world, as well as parents in our own community, talking about how training for parents actually helps these complex kids.
We'll talk about the issues we hear parents struggling with all the time and how a coach approach can support and empower your amazing young people.
We won't tell you what to do. We're going to help you figure out how. So let's move on to the next conversation. Welcome back, everybody, to another conversation in the Parenting with Impact podcast. Our guest is Deborah MacNamara, and we are going to be talking about parenting complex kids. I know that comes as a wild surprise to all of you. Welcome, Deborah. Tell us a little bit about how you came to be doing the work you do with families of what we like to call complex kids.
Great. Thank you. Well, thanks very much for having me. I started working with Gordon Neufeld, who wrote the book, Hold On to Your Kids with Gabor Mate. And so I basically interned with him after I finished my PhD. I had children at the time, and so I was also desperately longing to make sense of my own two very highly sensitive children, and working in academia, and was working in counseling and teaching. And so when I found Gordon's work, I realized there was a name for people like me. It's called developmentalist. So helping how do we grow up? What is the story of human development? What is it that we need to grow and to thrive? And what does thriving look like? And so I've been immersed in that for about the last 17 or 20 years, I guess it's been.
Mm-hmm. It changes quickly, doesn't it?
Jumped 3 years there.
I was going to say, well, the time frame of the last few years has thrown us all off.
Yeah, that's right.
I love that. The developmentalist, how do we grow up and what does thriving look like? And as I heard you saying it, what came to me was how much of it is about our continued development as adults, right? So it's not just what does development look like for our kids, but it's also what does development look like for us, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. As parents, I mean, our whole developmental journey as a parent, as we leave adulthood and become, immersed in parenthood, parenthood is a whole developmental period, significantly different from adulthood. And so we have childhood, adulthood, and parenthood. And so how do we grow to be the parents our kids need? What is it that's required of us to step into that role, depending upon the child that we get? Each of them so varied and different, but that will stretch us in different ways. So yeah, it's a beautiful question.
Well, go ahead.
Wait, just one more thing that just hit me was like, and most of us move into that journey of parenting before we've really figured out the adulthood journey, right?
Well, yeah, and we can continue on in adulthood too. I mean, and some people do. And so that evolution as an adult would also be unfolding. But as soon as you have children, your development is tied together in a different way.
Well, and what was coming up for me listening to you talk, Deborah, and we talk about this with our parents a lot, is that parenting doesn't come with a handbook, right? Mm-hmm. And this audience, because we're parents of kids who don't quite fit the mold, whatever flavor that happens to be for you that's listening. And those kids don't have the manual. And so you're trying to develop into a role maybe that's different than what you thought, or different than your parents, or different than the role models that you've had, because you've got a complex kid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly when you have a child whose development is faced with complexities, whether that's internal to their body, external to the outside world, and a combination thereof, it requires us to adapt more, to be flexible, to make sense of that child, to make sense of ourselves in relationship to that child. I would say parenting is largely an adaptive endeavor.
Yeah, isn't it though?
It is for everybody. However, when you have complex needs or special needs, then it's really in your face a lot. And sometimes it can feel like there's no rest from it.
Yeah. So from your lens, knowing the audience we're speaking to today are parents of what we like to call complex kids, And they could be kids of 4-year-olds, 14-year-olds, 24, 34-year-olds, right? Like all across the spectrum, who are all in this adaptive world of trying to adapt to what this world is that they're in. For us, we look at it from a lens of a coach approach, and we offer a coaching framework for parents to find that what we call flexible structure of parenting complex kids. From your lens, what do you think is really most important for parents in this space to understand better?
Well, I think the key to adaptation is keeping our heart soft and keeping the invitation warm. I think when we get overwhelmed, too alarmed, too frustrated, too upset, that invitation to care, to draw our kids close, to be a place of rest, I think that's the greatest challenge for parents, especially when under stress, is how do we keep our hearts warm to our kids and to the other adults who help us raise our children, who don't necessarily always understand our kids. And there can be a lot of frustration on that doorstep as well. But how do we work through relationship to create conditions for our kids to survive? And that calls a lot from us to the surface of patience and consideration and caring. And of course, the next question will be, well, how do we keep ourselves well while doing all of that? That's usually how it goes. But yeah, I think that's the greatest challenge, to adapt. If you don't have your feelings, you can't adapt.
Well, and I love that, keeping your heart warm. And I think there's a lot of parents, particularly parents of bristly teenagers, who are going, well, my heart's warm, but they're completely shut down to me. They don't want anything to do with me.
The room's a mess.
They don't want the warm. They don't want warm or whatever it is, right? It looks different, I'm guessing, as your kids get older.
Well, I think how we convey connection differs, right? How a teacher would convey connection to a student, to how I would with my teenagers versus my husband. Obviously, those are different. I just tend to try to exploit my teenagers' need for hunger and for movement. They want drives. So I try to find my doorway in where I can and try to figure out, how do I hold on? How do I become a consultant in their life? How do I be irreplaceable for them? How do I be a soft place? And prickly, pushing you away, sometimes full of resistance. There are all sorts of things that happen in our relationships that make it difficult to hold on. There is no doubt about that. That's why that's so challenging sometimes. Yeah. Teenagers they need us, but they don't want to need us. So
exactly. And they're developmentally wired to begin to separate from us.
Yeah. Well, they separate out into the world. They still need a home, but yes, they want to need us differently.
Yes.
They want to go it alone. They want to have their own mind. And yet you look at them and you're like, oh my goodness, I have so much wisdom to try to give you, but they're like, nope, got to figure it out. And so it's a nail biter.
Well, and I love the phrase you use, like how to become irreplaceable, right? Mm-hmm. It's this sort of, I think about parents who are like, my kids, all they do is want something from me. Well, mm-hmm. It gives you a door and it gives you an opportunity to connect. Even if it feels like it's one way, it's still an opportunity, I'm guessing.
Yeah. And I think, it's keeping it in perspective. My husband and I, we have children in university now, but having just gone through this period of development, we often will say to each other, what were you like when you're that age? I'm like, they're far better versions of me than I was. Right. I was doing no different. And so it's like, it's hard, right? Because there is such a self-absorption that comes as part of the adolescent development, where it is all about them. So they can cross the bridge from childhood into adulthood. This is part of the developmental trajectory here in adolescence, that they are very idealistic, very self-conscious, very self-absorbed. And sometimes people say, oh, they're so narcissistic. No, they're just into themselves. They're into themselves because they have to figure out this next leg of development where they have to be a participant. See, in childhood, we do so much of this, we create so much of the context for them to grow and develop, and they're not really able to go it alone. But in teenagers, they actually have a lot more appetite for autonomy. They have a role to play in shaping their own development. And so, they have to step into it. And it really does become about them, sometimes all about them, and very self-absorbed. So that can hit us. I think we can feel very much on the outside of that. It can feel like a real shift, sometimes a place of grief, a place of confusion for parents, and upset that somehow, after all the care and diligence that you've put in, that your child suddenly is tossing you to the curb, like you're not needed. And I'd say, hold on, find ways to hold on. It's a period, it's a transition. Don't take for granted all that you've done in that child's life and all that is there.
Well, and here's what strikes me as I'm hearing you talking, because you're talking about neurotypical development. Mm-hmm. And in our community, part of what happens is, because these kids are neurodivergent, you've got, on the one hand, developmentally, they're in that context as teens where they're expected to begin to live their own lives and start individuating in those ways. And on the other hand, developmentally, they've also got lagging skills in terms of executive function that make it more difficult to do the things that their peers are doing and that's expected of them. And so I think what we see with parents is that the parents have a harder time knowing, how do I let go if I don't have confidence that they're actually going to pick up the baton?
Yeah, absolutely.
Even though they want the baton.
Yeah, absolutely. And the fear that they could be exploited by people who can see that they're struggling in particular areas, or that they're more vulnerable in certain areas. So, of course, as a parent, that always is your instincts, is to protect your child. Yes. One of the things that I think is part of development is not just that we, the child or the teen takes the steering wheel in their own hands and, charts their own course forward, but also to put them in contexts that are shaping in themselves and around adults that are shaping. So, a good job, a volunteer job where they can be the answer to something, a good school environment where they're connected to other caring adults, and those things that shape their identity, that provide some structure, routine, and boundaries. Those things actually help our kids. They create guardrails, without having to be so explicitly on top of them for things and watching them. There's, my husband grew up, and his single mom basically saved all her money and got him a junior golf membership. So he hung around the golf club, and you have to dress a certain way, you have to talk a certain way. He loved golf. He fell in love with golf, but it was the best place for him to be after school. Always on the golf course. And he had, whether he felt like it or not, which he didn't, he had all these supervisors around in terms of what was appropriate, and kept him safe, and also gave him a sense of identity and what was appropriate and what wasn't appropriate. And so, that's where I go is who do we introduce our children to? How do we set up contexts where they can explore and discover who they are, see themselves in the world, or, in the eyes of other people around them, and yet provide that structure and routine that they still need and crave.
Beautiful. So we need to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll play on this theme of creating context. Hi, it's Elaine. And if you like this podcast, you'll love our coach approach. Whether you're a parent looking for support or a professional supporting families, we invite you to download a free guide with 12 key coaching tools at impactparents.com/gift. You can begin using a coach approach to help kids become more independent or improve all of your conversations at work and at home. That's impactparents.com/gift. Welcome back, everybody.
Yeah, no, Deborah, as we were talking earlier about creating context for our kids, I think part of what I'm aware of is this sort of conscious planning, right? It's this sort of we think our kids are on a particular trajectory. We find now that they're on a little bit of a different trajectory. We have to maybe take ourselves out of the mainstream and go, okay, wait, if I wanted to create a situation where my kids can become more independent, which is what they want, but do it in a way that is developmentally appropriate because they're 3 to 5 years behind their peers, how do I begin to make that happen? And it takes conscious planning that might take your kid out of the mainstream of things, if I'm guessing. Does that?
Well, I go back to cultural tradition around our adolescence. Like, adolescence actually isn't a developmental time period. It's actually a product of a society that has a very elongated pathway into adulthood. So what used to happen, if we look through cultural tradition, is that age when a child was more viable and more autonomous, they would be matched up with people in the community to see, this is where you fit, these are your people, this is where you can contribute. And the adults in their life would take a very active role in playing matchmaker. Today, we put our kids far too much in charge of things, in the sense that, well, go choose from all the occupations out there. I mean, what an overwhelming question. I
just have to tell you, when I was a social worker, this goes back 40 years. When I was a social worker, one of my jobs was to help eighth grade kids figure out where to apply to high school in New York City. So they had to decide if they wanted to go into cosmetology or neurochemical engineering at 13 years old.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
It's too much. And you're barely understanding who you are. I mean, I remember sitting in front of the computer, or whatever it was called back then. I don't know the program, and it came out that I should be a funeral director. And I'm like, can I talk to someone about these results? Like, how did you come up with this? What I really needed was someone to sit down with me and say, what are your favorite subjects? What do you like to do? What do you want to do with your one big, beautiful world? What brings you joy? What do you find yourself getting lost in? Like, I think parents and adults in a child's life are so well positioned to understand that child and say, oh no, this kid needs to build. This kid just needs to move. This kid can make sense of the world or tell stories or whatever it is. And then to say, okay, what I know about you, there's this whole other world that I know about here. Would you like to explore? Would you like to look into it? Can I make some introductions? I did that with my kids, helped them get into the labor market. They found some things they liked and some things they didn't. And so it's this dance of helping them build relationships, but not doing it for them. It's a dance.
Well, what I heard and what you said was the invitation. Are you interested in that? Would you like that? Like there's an offering and an allowing rather than a directing or
absolutely
pointing.
Well, and then the reminder that, and I don't know about you guys, but as we get older, the things that feed us at 18 might be different than the things that feed us at 34, and to let them know, hey, it's okay to try something for a while and then have it not be what you want to do. Correct.
Absolutely. And I think we should want them to do some things that, have some trial and error in them, because then they figure out who they are. Yeah. And they have to adapt, and they see the world anew. Like, my daughter trying to find housing. She's like, Mom, it costs a lot to live.
Right.
Really? Tell me more.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. But you could tell that to your child till you're blue in the face, but until they sort of venture out to try to experience the world, one of my daughters was surprised, I could get fired if there's any drugs or alcohol or swearing or stealing or firearms. And I'm like, well, do you have any of those things? You don't do any of those things. No, but Mom, the real world, like you get fired for these kind of things. I'm like, yeah. It's serious business out there. And so, you have to sit back, and we know this stuff, but what's more important is that we provide the base through which they can venture out and explore. And if they're having trouble seeing the world, or it's, they're behind their same age peers and putting all the pieces together, then we really need to just be thoughtful about context and the caring adults that we can put them into the hands too, who will nurture them, guide them, mentor them. We all need good mentors. And so I think it's just taking an active role in that. And, like you said, not doing it not choosing for them, not being directive about it, but this invitation to shoehorn them in and to prepare a path that they have a steering wheel in their hands and they say, this is what I want.
Yeah, that feels so far off for so many of our kids as complex kids. And yet that makes it all the more important for them to begin to explore different areas of interest and pursue different talents. I had a kid who probably tried every sport on the planet before finally landing on one. And a lot of our kids, I think, are really experiential. Yeah. And so what you're speaking to is that opportunity for them to try things and not feel like they've got to get it right, or they've got to answer it now, or they've got to know now, but that they get permission to explore.
Yeah. And our outcome driven, product driven, certificate driven,
Yes,
materialistic sort of world or cultural values don't lend that self to any child anymore. But it's always been that we need that space as well.
true. So true.
Space to dream. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think about, as you were saying that, I was thinking about, when our kids are little, we do so much more dreaming. I mean, we've been talking kind of about careers, but it's like, think about all the costumes that they had, and they tried this, and they, it's sort of just even finding ways to give our kids space to even look at and explore and read and whatever it is, before there's this pressure to say, okay, we gotta make decisions, we gotta choose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, their peers too, like navigating peer and social relationships. I would often say to my kids, be friendly to everybody, but take resumes for friendships, and it's okay. Have a look around and figure out who your people are and who aren't. And not everybody will, you're in high school. You don't have to just jump at anything, just take your time, and it's okay. Because there's a lot of pressure that way as well, right? To adopt a group, particular identity, or but just it's okay to take your time and have a look around and figure out who you are. I think our teens don't get that message enough. It's all about fitting in. Take your time, look around, do your art, do your movement, whatever it is that brings you joy. Figure out who you are, and then you're ready to face the world. That space is oftentimes robbed from them.
Well, and it comes back to what we were talking about earlier, which is our own anxiousness and fears about our kids. And it's like this sort of, we're sitting there going, but the clock's ticking. I got to get them, instead of just being able to relax a little bit and let them go at a pace that feels more healthy for them.
Yeah. Well, I think that's our fear as parents, right? We want them to launch. We want them to thrive. We want them to reach their full human potential, whatever that potential is. We don't know. That's for them to figure it out. And how do we support them? But yes, and I think, as a younger mother, I didn't know the trajectory, and I hadn't worked with so many parents and have seen so many incredible stories of how kids, just figure out who they are and become adults. And it's just, it's so beautiful. And it's just patience and hold on, keep providing, at the roots of what it is they need to grow, safe attachments, keep your invitation warm, keep their heart soft, just keep up our end of the deal, and to be patient. Because if those things are there for a child, and they are taking, they're trying to get out there into the world and make mistakes sometimes and have bumps along the way, but they're going to find their way. They've got that incredible, the energy inside of a child where they just want to do it. It's like watching a toddler walk and you're like, oh, they're so tipsy. They're going to fall.
They're going to figure it out.
But you can see that in the teenagers, and you're like, but then you take a step back and you're like, look at the spirit in this kid. They just want to get out there. And when you see that, like that pulse inside of a child or a teenager is just so wonderful. But it's a bit of a nail biter for their parents. We don't get to kind of hover around them like when they're toddlers.
When they're toddlers.
Everything in a way. It's like, oh gosh, it's different.
So this is a lovely conversation. You have such a beautiful energy. And I wish we could keep going, and it's time for us to start wrapping it up. Tell people how they can find out more about you, Deborah.
Well, usual sources, website, social media, also the Neufeld Institute, where I work on faculty with Gordon Neufeld. So yeah,
Great.
Books,
articles. And we will have all that in the show notes so that you can find all the requisite links that you want to find out more about your work and about the Neufeld Institute.
Thank you.
So, Deborah, how do we wrap this up? I mean, what either bring us back to something?
Can I share something?
Oh, of course.
Lead into that, because something became really clear to me as you were talking. I have a son who just graduated from college, and I've been getting a lot of that, and he doesn't know what he's doing next, right? And I've been getting a lot of that. Well, what's he doing next? It's like, what? He's taking a little time off. And what you just said reminded me that this is a kid who all of his life kind of didn't like to rush. He was never a fast driver. He didn't like to race out the door in the morning. Like, this is a kid who's always kind of liked a chill approach to the world. And you said at the beginning of this conversation, we parents, we understand our kids better than anybody else. And what I just realized is that what I get about this kid is he needs to do it at his pace. And he will, but if I try to rush him, it'll shut him down. So thank you for that reminder and validation. I just really, it is very present and current for me at this moment. So thanks.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So where Diane was leading you, and I'm sorry I interrupted, is there anything else that you want to add to this conversation, or something else you want to bring back to kind of button the conversation? I think that's what I felt like I needed to bring back to button. But what do you want to bring in to complete this conversation for our listeners?
I think the big theme that we've been talking about is how to hold on to our kids, not just when they're small, but when they're teens and when they're adults. And how do we go the duration, of human development? Because if you think about it with your teenager, it's, 18, 19 years, and then they're an adult. And then you've got, if you're blessed, you've got this incredible lifespan with your child as they become adults and potentially parents. And so this relationship thing, it's a long-term deal. And in talking to Gordon, and Gordon and Gabra's book is called Hold On to Your Kids. And I can tell you, as a parent of teenagers, now adults, and on the sensitivity spectrum for sure, and myself included, those words of hold on just resonated to help me hold on to what my job was, what my role was, what I needed to do to be able to hold on. And, when I talk to Gordon often, it's not just, it's like our lifetime here, but if you actually do this well and hold on, our children actually hold on to us even when we're no longer here. We are still a source of support. We are still a voice in their head. Our values still guide them. We are passed on to the next generation. And so holding on is such a beautiful word and sentiment and values that come behind it. It's certainly been my foundation when I've needed to find myself settled on something. I go back to that. Your job is to hold on. Okay. It's hard to hold on right now. Yes, it is. How do you hold on? What would it look like to hold on?
Yeah. Hold on.
Hold on.
So as we wrap, Deborah, do you have a favorite quote or a motto that you'd like to share with our audience?
I just think it's just how to hold on to your kids, I think it was a quote in actually Hold On to Your Kids. It fits with our conversation, but how to hold on to them, not out of our own needs, our own alarm, our own fulfillment, but how do we hold on so they're free to let go of us? That's really the key thing, knowing that relationship frees us. It doesn't enslave us. It nourishes us. It brings us to rest. So how do we hold on?
That's gorgeous. Thank you.
What a beautiful conversation today, Deborah. Thank you so much for being with us.
You both. Yeah.
Truly lovely.
Thank you.
All right, friends. First of all, Deborah, thank you for being here with us and for bringing your beautiful energy and work to the world.
Thank you.
It's really a pleasure to share it with you.
I enjoyed myself. Thanks. Beautiful to meet you both.
And to those of you listening, what are you taking away from this conversation? Take a moment to check in with yourself. Check in with your heart. What's your insight from this conversation you've been listening to? What awareness has come to you? I love that sort of closing concept of all of it is how to hold on to them so they're free to let go of us. What are you aware of in your world and development of raising your complex kids? What do you want to take forward with you?
And thank you for those of you listening. Thank you for everything that you're doing for yourself and for your kids. At the end of the day, you make the difference.
Take care, everybody. See you next time.
You've been listening to the Parenting with Impact podcast with Elaine and Diane. For more information on the Impact Parents community or to join Sanity School for Parents, please visit impactparents.com. If you like what you've heard, please share this podcast with friends who need similar guidance and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. For the essentials of Elaine and Diane's coach approach to parenting, download a free tip sheet at impactparents.com/podcast.
Behavior therapy training for parents is actually recommended as a first-line treatment for complex kids. For information about Sanity School, our training program for parents or teachers, which has helped thousands of families around the globe, visit impactparents.com/Sanity School.